Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, with just 10 weeks to go until the end of the transition period, Brexit talks between Brussels and Downing Street have once again entered an intensified phase. I'll be discussing the flashpoints of the week with our business correspondent Simon Pusey. And after recording growth of 4.9% in Q3, China is now leading the charge for the global economic recovery. I'll be discussing the geopolitical reactions with Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA. Then later, amidst the truly horrific depictions coming out of Nigeria this week, a history-making tech story almost went under the radar. Philanthropist and senior tech consultant Tommy Davies will be joining me to talk about Stripe's $200 million takeover of Nigeria's online payment processor Paystack. And to our first topic, Brexit. Talks between UK and EU Brexit negotiators entered an intensified phase on Thursday this week after Brussels said both sides would be required to compromise on trade issues. According to Britain's independent news publication, Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, offered an olive branch to his UK counterpart Lord Frost as the deadline for a deal looms. What we know so far is these renewed negotiations will take place in London between October the 22nd and October the 25th. Downing Street have warned that the no-deal trade scenario still could not be ruled out. The biggest point of contention is still post-Brexit fishing rights, with neither side confident of finding a route to a suitable compromise. Frustrated EU officials had this to say on the matter.
Time is very short, and we stand ready to negotiate 24/7 on all subjects based on legal text. So the UK has a big decision to make. It's their free and sovereign choice, and we will always respect them, whatever choice they make, but their sovereign answer will determine their level of access to our internal market. This is just common sense. We want a deal which is fair and balanced, but we are also ready in case of no deal. In June 2016, the United Kingdom took a democratic decision to leave the European Union. We respected this sovereign decision in 2016, and we respect sovereignty now, UK sovereignty now. Our UK friends say they want an ambitious and close relationship. We welcome this because we want the same. But the UK wants access to a single market, while at the same time being able to diverge from our standards and regulations when it suits them. On ne peut pas avoir le beurre, l'argent du beurre et le sourire de la crémière. You can't have your cake and eat it too. In fact, the United Kingdom now has an important choice to make about its own future. It's not about choosing a negotiation tactic. It's about choosing the model of society and the model of economy for their own future. Do our British friends want to regulate state aid? And do they want to maintain high standards in health, food security or climate in close relationship with Europe? If so, why not commit to them in our future agreement?
We had very intense, I have to add also, constructive meeting with the Chancellor Gove this morning. It was the fourth regular session of the Joint Committee, which I have to underscore once again is the body where we should resolve our differences, where we should look for the common solutions, and which is responsible for timely and proper implementation of the withdrawal agreement. So what we concluded this morning was that we are going to, I would say, redouble of our efforts and work for the solution. So we would have much higher frequency on debating outstanding issues linked with the protocol and with all the issues which the protocol is covering. and for all other outstanding decisions which have to be adopted before the end of the year. We consider that controversial articles in breach of withdrawal agreement, I would say in the breach of trust, and therefore we had to proceed with the legal action. At the same time, I want to say that also this morning discussions show that if we put our minds into it, I believe that we can solve the issues in the framework of the Joint Committee, and definitely on the side of the European Union, we are going to do our utmost to achieve that.
For more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, at the start of the week, it was no deal. That's what was coming out of senior cabinet ministers' mouths during British media interviews. But now we're hearing negotiations are back on. Just 10 weeks to go. Where are we with this? Yeah, and it could, of course, still be no deal. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. But yes, like you say, Michel Barnier has now arrived in London again, the first time since he was here in September for meetings with his counterpart, David Frost, who's the chief negotiator for the UK. Negotiations stalled last week after EU leaders called on the UK to make the necessary moves towards a deal. UK leaders said, no, it's your turn to make moves. And there was basically a week period which was sort of deadlock when nothing happened. And it looked like it was sort of no deal. But then a speech by Michel Barnier on Wednesday of this week sort of seemed to defrost things a little bit. He said compromises on both sides were needed, telling the European Parliament that he believed an agreement was within reach and that he was willing to work day and night. There are still these three key areas of disagreement. They are the fishing rights, of course, post-Brexit competition rules, and how any deal would be enforced. But the EU have said that they are now ready to sort of resume talks, and it's going to be the next few days in London. Michel Barnier, David Frost talking things over. It's worth pointing out that last week there was an EU summit, and a lot of leaders at that EU summit were talking about, well, playing tough on this Brexit. And, you know, they're obviously playing to the galleries back home. They're sort of looking back at France and Germany and talking to their people and saying it's not worth leaving the EU because look at Britain and how stuck they are now. Similarly, the UK, I think the UK side are doing the same. They're trying to look tough. So when it comes to negotiations with Manchester, for example, in terms of a tier 3 support for them, when it comes to sort of free school meals, the UK government are also playing tough because they're aware that the EU are looking at them and saying, oh, I wonder how domestically these guys negotiate, and they don't want to appear weak. So I think it's a little bit of sort of chest beating from both sides. But yeah, Michel Barnier is over here, and it is now less than a month before a deal will have to be ready in time for parliamentary ratification. So things definitely going to speed up in the next few days, and who knows where we're going to be in a week from now. Exactly, but yeah, you'll be updating us, won't you? Thank you, Simon. Now to some other news from across the world. China is now leading the charge for the global economic recovery after posting Q3 GDP growth of 4.9%. The world's second largest economy's trade figures for September also pointed to a strong recovery, with exports growing by 9.9% and imports growing by 13.2% compared to September last year. Over the previous 2 decades, China has seen an average economic growth rate of about 9%, although the pace has gradually been slowing. While the COVID-19 pandemic has hampered this year's growth targets, China also remains in a bitter trade war with the US. Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA, joins me for more on this. Jamil Ahmed, as always, thanks for joining me on Channel's Business Global. China's Q3 GDP figures are in. What were your takeaways from that?
Resilience. I think that it's an envy of the world right now that the economy where this pandemic started and the economy where arguably the measures and the restrictions had been the strictest by far, 6 months later is managing to print Q3 numbers of close to 5%. I know the expectations were 5.2%, but still the expectations of 5.2% were narrowly missed because we saw the reality of 4.9%. I just come from an engagement with an economy where the growth figures were contraction by 50%. And when you consider what's also gone on in other areas of the world too, where many economies will be lucky to get such a figure, I think that 5% shows resilience. It also shows China's standing in the world economy, because in terms of world GDP contribution, we're going from 16%. And should the economy continue to grow at a time where other economies are contracting, Chinese GDP and the economy could account for as much as a fifth. That's 20% of world GDP heading into 2021. So there's not much you can disregard with those figures. Just hope that it helps the world economy prosper and recover from what has been a very difficult year, to be polite.
A difficult year. That's the understatement of the year, isn't it, Jamil? But those figures are pretty extraordinary. Thank you for capturing the sentiment there for us. What about the domestic market? That appears to be the strategy. That's always been the strategy pre-pandemic, but it appears to be ramping up. Do you think the 1.4 billion market that is available in China is ready for Chinese goods?
It's not, and it won't be for. We could talk about this throughout 2020 and it probably still won't be ready. China's making huge strides. Now remember, the first time I went to China was actually in 2013, 2014. And this is when the political party of Beijing was at that point putting the narrative out that we import greatly from the world economy and the world economy has benefited from this, but we also want to develop a domestic demand and domestic economy. And we began to see the Chinese consumer at that point begin to make huge amounts of world GDP contribution on their own through retail sales, through travel, through imports and so on, from what they were importing from others. And now we're seeing a bit of the tide turn where the economy is starting to be able to be more domestic reliant. The pandemic's not going to matter as much to China from an external circumstance as what it matters to us and when we look at external demand. But at the same point, with such a population that's still growing, it's still becoming more affluent. You still have millennials that are taking more of a control of a piece of a pie. It will take a far much longer for the economy to completely domestic reliant, but yet it's making strides, and that's a concern for the world economy as well, because that does mean at some point China will not need the world economy as much as it has needed since 2000, and it means that we will need China more. So this is why post-pandemic bilateral relations have to be very much intact across the world, and it shouldn't be a world of isolation, which is what we're facing and where the risks are, because everybody needs everybody and everybody needs unified relationships in this kind of environment.
Absolutely, that's the UN line, isn't it? Lastly, before you go, Jamil, let's talk about China geopolitically. Clearly, as you pointed out at the top there, these figures have got to be frightening for the other G7 nations. Every single report I've read this week says the world's second largest economy. Is it likely to be the first soon?
I think if it wasn't for the pandemic and if it wasn't for the Trump presidency, it probably would have become the world's strongest economy by 2020. But the trade war and the other bilateral issues we've seen throughout the Trump presidency, that's prevented China from becoming number one. But it's still inevitable it will become number one at some point. It's probably going to happen this decade. Essentially, how we all adapt to the post-pandemic world, and hopefully we can all forget about this. There's going to be a lot of hurt. There's going to be a lot of resentment. There's going to be a lot of, we've lost a year. This could add much to people's children and so on because of the educational issues and all sorts of inconvenience we've all had to be dealt with in our daily activities. At the same point, we have to unify and we have to protect and we have to work together, because we could face a world where we have some economies are performing like this, we have some economies that are going step by step, and we have some economies that are completely missing from this altogether. So everybody has to come together. There's no doubt, whether you have a Trump presidency, whether you have a Biden presidency, whether we have a change of leadership anywhere across the world, everybody has to be unified and look at globalization and how it can help the upcoming generation, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of problems, and the world economy does not need more problems. It already has enough.
It already has enough. What a beautiful message to end a pretty busy week. Jamil Ahmed, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for joining me on Channels Business Global. Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be discussing details of the historic Stripe Paystack acquisition with philanthropist Tommy Davies. See you after the break. To Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be discussing Nigeria's tech world with philanthropist Tommy Davies. But before then, here's some company news for you. UBS reaped the benefits of the rebounding global markets in the third quarter, with its investment banking arm helping the overall business achieve a 99% jump in profit. The Swiss lender's wealth management arm, which has been a focus of departing chief executive Sergio Amotti, also expanded despite the coronavirus pandemic. UBS's net profit came in at $2.1 billion in the 3 months ended September. It was up 99% year on year and solidly beat expectations of $1.56 billion. Diluted earnings per share rose 101% year-on-year to 56 cents from 28 cents a year earlier. Profit before tax at the lender's investment banking arm saw 268% year-on-year, hitting $632 million. Boohoo shares crashed on Monday after it was confirmed accounting giant PwC is to step down as auditor of the fast fashion giant hit by a supply chain scandal. Shares in the £4 billion retailer, which is owned by British billionaires the Kamani family, plunged nearly 14%. The company has come under scrutiny in recent months over allegations some Leicester-based Boohoo suppliers paid workers below the minimum wage. Flybe could be flying again next year after administrators announced a deal had been struck with investors to restart the regional airline. The Exeter-based Flybe went bust in early March with the loss of more than 2,000 jobs as the impact of the coronavirus crisis on passenger demand proved the last straw for the struggling airline. The administrators, EY, said Flybe's brand and remaining assets had been sold to Time Oppo, a company affiliated to Cyprus Capital, which had pumped money into the Virgin Atlantic-led rescue attempt in 2019. The deal could mean Flybe restarts as a regional airline in UK in early 2021. Now over to our next topic. Stripe is stepping up its expansion into Africa through the acquisition of Lagos-based payments firm Paystack in a deal reportedly worth more than $200 million. Like Stripe, Paystack provides APIs that let merchants with just a few lines of code build online payment features. For the details of the deal, joining me now from London is philanthropist and senior tech consultant Tommy Davies. Tommy Davies, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global once again. What a time to be alive and to be so immersed into Nigeria's tech ecosystem. I know you're an angel, you're a huge angel, but with that burden on your shoulders, can you still appreciate the immense gratitude and the palpability of what's happening in Nigeria at the moment?
Well, it forces a reflection as to what the future portends, because one thing is for certain: something has changed, and it's a question of where we go with this. So everybody's with bated breath. There are just too many dimensions to start, but I have to say that my heart goes out in prayer to the families of those who lost their lives yesterday.
Okay, thank you for that, TD. I actually was referring to Nigeria's tech ecosystem, but of course, I think it would be silly of us, even thousands of miles away in London, to not reflect on what's happening in Nigeria and the entire End SARS movement. And it kind of has got something to do with the tech ecosystem. Let's talk about Paystack. Last week, acquired by Stripe for $200 million. I saw your image that you tweeted. You also sent it to me personally. You look at those two guys, I'm sure we're showing it to our viewers now, and typically these are some of the individuals that may or may not be approached by Nigerian police and you'd be accused of doing something that they may not be doing. Has this had a really serious effect on the tech community? You would know because you're on the ground so much.
Yeah, well, the challenge is real and palpable. It became such an atrocity because as long as you were young, you were not supposed to be carrying a laptop or an iPhone. It became very, very bad, to put it mildly, because quite a number of these young people lost their lives. There's a list on social media of, they've cataloged exactly who died when, and it is just horrific. But what Shola and Ezra have done is also showing us what the youth are capable of. A couple of years ago, we're talking about Inya Boyaji and what he'd done with Andela and Flutterwave. Recently, we've been talking about Tayo Viosu and what he's doing with Pagas. So you start to see a trend. This is not something overnight, is the point I'm trying to make. This is, and that's why I said in the article that this is a shot across the bows. Okay, Africa fintech is maturing. There's no gainsaying it. The evidence is there, and as a consequence, those that have invested, like some of the members of my syndicate did in Shola and Ezra 5 years ago, who are now walking away with 100x. I wish I got in on that deal, but it validates the angel investing scene on the continent, and especially in Nigeria, because we now know people who have invested in startups and actually exited with multiples. It's not just Tommy Davis telling you he did it. There are quite literally now quite a few people who've done that too. So there's an increasing number of us, and that is what I'm taking away from this. So more power coming in from tech, especially in payments. Fintech as a whole, we're starting to see savings. And we did a deal earlier in the year in investments, so trading in foreign stock and things of that nature, where people are hedging currency. So there's a lot to be had in that industry. It's quite exciting, but like I said, it's the beginning.
Absolutely, it's the beginning. You said fintech is evolving, and I've read dozens of articles over the past couple of days saying that this Paystack acquisition is a game changer. But why? Why is it a game changer? Why does the evolvement of Nigeria's tech industry depend so heavily upon American money? And that may be obvious to you, but for some of us that isn't obvious. Why can't it grow in country?
Okay, we've got growth in country. We've got InterSwitch. Okay, but the challenge is this: institutional investors on the continent are not in the high risk category. Their money are in government bonds and stocks. They're not playing in this game. If you want real money, you have to go outside of the continent to get it. That's just the hard reality of it.
That is a harsh reality. We're running out of time, Tommy Davis, but I've got to ask you, just so you can educate our viewers, what was it about Paystack? What was their unique selling point, as they'd say, the USP, that has made it potentially a history maker?
Well, you know what's funny? It's what we probably don't like hearing, all right, when we hear it, because we say, oh, come on, not another. But it's because they set out to become the Stripe of Africa. And they have become the Stripe of Africa by setting out to do that. So it's a dream come true. They had the right dream and it fit the right time. We say, oh, you can't be the Facebook of Africa. Well, sorry, if they can be the Stripe of Africa, why can't I?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That's the statement they've made. Thank you.
Tommy Davis, such a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for coming to talk to us at such short notice amidst such heightened tensions. Tommy Davis, thank you for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.